We know about Pokemon abilities that are detrimental to their users' competitive viability, but how bad are these abilities actually? Today we'll be talking about abilities with negative effects, and I'm not just talking about the infamous ones which totally make a mon unviable. There are actually a decent chunk of abilities that have negative effects, and you might not realize it because they're usually pretty good abilities. This is based on the page of abilities with negative effects listed by Bulbapedia. So we'll see abilities that are generally seen as great while explaining their negative effects, and also covering the abilities where the negative effects just plain destroy the user's will to live. The general viability will be covered and then placed in a tier list to see which of these abilities are the worst. The categories being great, well worth any negatives, generally worth it, an even risk to reward, a nothing ability, generally negative ability, and one that ruins viability. Starting with a great ability, these generally don't see the consequences of their negative effects unless it's in certain scenarios or the user forgets how they work. For example, Contrary is an ability that reverses stat changes. If you were to get intimidated, your attack would be increased by a stage instead of lowered. This also works for self-inflicted stat changes, making it a great tool on users like Superior and Lurantis who can use the incredibly strong Leaf Storm and receive a +2 to their special attack instead of the normal -2. This is also seen with the move Superpower on most other Contrary users. The negatives this ability can potentially provide are mainly if you accidentally use a setup move and lower your stats. This means you can't use Coil on your Superior to raise your accuracy and get the benefit of the defense boost. You also would not be able to use stat boosting berries, weakness policy, or any double support tools like coaching or decorate. But these are things you keep in mind when building your team, so this ability is almost always beneficial. We'll place this ability in the great tier. Normalize is a signature ability of the Delcatty line. It changes all moves into the normal type. This includes status moves as well. While this ability gives you stab on every attack, it also means you won't be able to hit super effectively, and Ghost will be immune to all of your attacks. It has some positive characteristics, like a normal type Thunder Wave being able to paralyze ground types, and since Generation 7, this ability buffs the power of your attacks by 20%. It's more of a shame that the line that has this ability will be terrible regardless, but we'll still slide this ability into the generally negative tier. Next we have Fluffy. This ability is seen on a few lines and halves the damage taken from contact moves. While this is a great ability to help tank a lot of hits, it does have a big negative effect of essentially giving a fire weakness. Fire type moves will do double damage, but Fluffy will still half damage if they make contact, meaning moves like Flare Blitz and Heat Crash will do normal damage. But a good chunk of the popular fire type moves don't make contact, giving this generally great ability an exploitable weakness. This is a really good example of a balanced double-edged sword ability, and it's very similar to Dry Skin, which we'll see a little bit later. This will go into the generally worth it tier, as you get super tanky against mons using contact moves, but having an extra weakness gives opponents some counterplay. Truant is likely the ability you all thought of when clicking on this video. The ability that nerfs Slacking into oblivion and prevents it from being a viable option in competitive play. Durant also can have Truant, but luckily isn't forced to run it like Slacking. We know how this ability works. Truant only allows you to move every other turn. Super easy to play around and take advantage of. You can't afford to give out free turns in competitive play, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the Rune's viability tier where it belongs. Next we have Weak Armor. This ability will activate when hit by a physical move. The user will have its speed raised by 2 stages and defense stat lowered by 1. This is a clear double-edged sword ability. It can be really useful on setup mons to get a crucial speed boost to sweep, or on lead sets to stack multiple layers of hazards. But the defense drops can make it a lot easier to knock the mon out, especially if you have a multi-hit move that will gradually do more damage. Its buff in Generation 7 to raise speed by 2 stages instead of 1 is huge for the slower mons with access, so I would say this ability is generally worth it. Now here's our second big stinker of the video. We see Sablei's signature ability, Stall. I never liked this ability as it doesn't really have many practical applications. Going last in Pokemon is rarely ever useful as you are more prone to hacks, getting taken out, and having your own move choices mess with. Sableye is already a slow Pokemon anyways, so any benefits it could have by being slow could be maintained by running the better Keen Eye. Although it always will run Prankster to be effective. This ability easily goes into the bottom tier, as I believe it would ruin the viability of any user. While we're on the topic, Prankster is a very popular ability as it gives priority to status moves. It can bring viability to otherwise very weak and mediocre mons. But as a Generation 7, Dark-type Pokemon aren't affected by moves boosted by Prankster. Having a whole type immune to your status moves can be pretty detrimental, as you can predict a Prankster mon to use a status move and have an easy swap into a Dark-type. With Dark-type Pokemon being very common, you don't really need to explicitly prep to have a Prankster counter. This will go into the generally worth it tier, since there is a whole type that counters Prankster moves. Rivalry is an ability that is very rarely seen due to its inconsistency. It gives the user a 25% attack power boost if the target shares a gender, and a 25% attack reduction if the target is opposite gender. The fact that every Pokemon with this ability uses one of their other abilities is a testament to how good it really is. You have control over your mon's gender, but no control over your opponent's. It could be useful in certain scenarios where you know what genders you might face, as some Pokemon are always male or always female. And if the target is genderless, then Rivalry has no effect, and you essentially have no ability against them. The inconsistency of this ability puts it in the meh tier. Now maybe the best ability on this list, we have Goldengo's signature ability, Good as Gold. Now this is technically an ability with negative effects, as it gives the Pokemon full immunity to status moves. This is almost always great, as you can dodge status inflicting moves like Will-O-Wisp and Thunder Wave. You aren't affected by moves like Taunt, Encore, Disable, or Stab Drop moves like Charm and Screech. What's the negative, you might ask? Well, this ability not only blocks status moves from foes, but also status moves from allies. This means you can't give Pokemon this ability helping hand support, you can't heal them with moves like Life Dew or Heal Pulse, or buff them with moves like Howl, Decorate, or Coaching. This is something you might actually forget in a match if you've never come across it, and you will actually have to consider this in your team composition if you're playing doubles. Nonetheless, this is easily in the top of great tier. No Guard is a really cool ability, as in practice, it gives the opponent the same properties as a user. No moves from or targeting the user can miss. But this is usually used to the advantage of the No Guard Pokemon, who can take advantage of low accuracy moves with great power and secondary effects without the fear of missing. You'll see dynamic punches flying from Machamp and Golurk, and hurricanes from Mega Pidgeot. But on mons like Doublade, who can't really take advantage of this ability, it is more of a detriment than anything. Your opponent's moves will never miss you, so they won't have to worry about clicking a safer, more accurate option. This of course is applicable to the other Pokemon with this ability too, but is a fair trade-off for them, as they can rely on these strong and accurate moves to be useful. This one is generally worth it, as most mons who have access to No Guard can abuse it. But in competitive situations, your opponent will know they can click their risky attacks without fear of missing. The next abilities to cover are Heavy Metal and Light Metal. Pretty much the same ability, but reversed, if you get what I'm saying. Heavy Metal doubles the user's weight, while Light Metal halves it. These abilities are very situational in a competitive environment, as they are only affected by a few moves. These are the moves Heavy Slam and Heat Crash when attacking, and Low Kick and Grass Knot when taking an attack. These moves' damage will vary based on the user's weight, with the attacking moves doing more the heavier the user is, and the others doing less the lighter the targeted mon is. So it's good to be heavier when attacking, but lighter when receiving. The move Skydrop also cannot be used on Pokemon above a certain weight. Although rare, I thought I'd mention it before the comment section got on me for it. Overall, the users of these abilities enjoy their other abilities far more often, and you would probably only see one of these abilities used on Duraludon in singles, since its preferred ability Stalwart is a doubles based ability. This will go into the nothing ability tier. Klutz is another ability that is very rarely seen. Competitively, this ability prevents the use of held items. With held items being such an integral part of competitive play, why would you want to use this ability? While it does have some very niche strategies, while you cannot fling an item when you have Klutz, you can trick and switcheroo items. This can be used to cripple your opponent with a choice item, Assault Vest, Sticky Barb, Status Orbs, and take away their beneficial item. Since the original items don't affect you, you won't receive their negative effects or be limited by their properties. Still, most Pokemon with Klutz prefer to have a different ability where they can benefit from their held item. It also isn't on the strongest roster of mons, so we're going to place this one in the generally negative tier. The ability Simple is really similar to Contrary, but instead of reversing stat changes, it doubles them. So while setting up can be a lot faster and deadlier, the negatives are definitely more exploitable. For example, a Bidoof with Simple who gets intimidated will have his attack drop by 2 stages instead of 1. If hit by String Shot, its speed lowered by 4 stages, so it can be abused by stat lowering moves and abilities for sure. But for the most part, if you're using Simple, you're likely going to have methods of boosting the stats you care about more than your opponent has ways of lowering those stats. So even though it's on derpy mons that aren't good competitively, it's an ability that does give them a chance to do some damage. This ability will be in the generally worth it tier. Before we get to the next ability, I want you to comment your favorite ability to use that has negative drawbacks. Covering a doubles base ability, we have Telepathy. This ability avoids damaging moves used by its allies. Usually a good ability as you can spam spread moves that hit everyone on the field like Earthquake or Surf. The downsides it does have are the times you would want to target your own ally. This could be an attempt to heal them with Pollen Puff, which is an attacking move normally, but heals allies if targeted into them. You also wouldn't be able to self-proc a weakness policy on direct attacks or spread attacks, but these situations would definitely be planned for beforehand. Most Pokemon with Telepathy will use a different, better ability, but it is still good enough to be in the generally worth it tier. Defeatist is a signature ability of Archeops, and while it isn't as detrimental as Truant or Slow Start, which we'll get to soon, it is a textbook detrimental ability. The user's attack and special attack stats will be cut in half when going below half their max HP. This is like receiving a burn that affects both attacking stats. Maybe the only reason it isn't the worst ability in Pokemon is because its effects don't immediately happen. You can sort of play around it by staying above half HP or healing above it, but it still sucks and is why I included Archeops in my video about the worst Pokemon with high base stats. This cleanly goes into the rune's viability tier. A controversial ability I'm going to cover next is Moody. This ability is banned in most Smogon tiers due to its randomness, as it raises a random stat by 2 stages and lowers another stat by 1. This effect takes place at the end of each turn the user is active. While the positives are obviously getting useful stat buffs gradually, the negatives are very much there if you get unlucky. A bad speed or defense drop can cost you your setup, while you can get stat boosts to stats you don't really need. But when you combine this with moves like Substitute and Protect, you will eventually gain more positive boosts, and the longer you can stall, the better the ability becomes. It's just nice that Moody was changed to not factor in accuracy and evasion boosts. This ability will go in the generally worth it tier. Speaking of stat changing abilities, Anger Shell is a newer ability seen on Cloth. It activates when this mon gets hit below half HP. It raises its speed and attacking stats while lowering defenses. Sort of a poor man's Shell Smash, but you don't have to burn a turn using a move. The offensive buffs are nice for sure and can facilitate a late game sweep, but defensive debuffs make you easier to revenge kill from Scarfers or priority users. So that, combined with the ability not activating through passive damage or entry hazards, gives some definite trade-offs for this ability. And although it's generally overshadowed by Regenerator on Cloth, it can still be the optimal play for an offensive build or to catch your opponent off guard. This one is on the lower end of generally worth it. Onto ability that is not too commonly seen, we have Solar Power. It's a weather-based ability that raises your special attack 1.5 times in the sun. That's a solid power boost for the strong special attackers that get access to this ability. The negative is, while you get that nice special attack boost in sun, you also lose 1/8 of your max HP each turn you are active in the sun. This happens even if you don't use an attack or if you switch in during the turn. That's like taking rough skin damage every turn just for using your ability. I'd say it's a better option in doubles in the faster paced game where chip damage isn't as crucial, and you can have an ally set sun for you the same turn your solar power mon is in. I have it in the even risk reward tier as it requires sun support, and the boost it gives is probably less useful than using a chlorophyll user in its place. Neutralizing Gas turns off the effects of virtually all Pokemon abilities. It doesn't mess with most form-changing abilities and a few other ones, but it is a solid ability that can help out against opponents that rely on their ability to function well. It can also help in doubles to turn off detrimental abilities for ally Pokemon. The negatives come from turning off beneficial ally abilities and turning off negative abilities your opponents might have. So as much as it can be a useful ability, it can also be beneficial to your opponent and taking advantage of, or harmful to your team if your original game plan doesn't work out. But I still believe this ability is generally worth it. It's time to get to the next ability, and hopefully I don't miss on this one. Of course I'm talking about Hustle here. A really risky ability that gives the user a 1.5 times attack boost while lowering the accuracy of physical moves by 20%. So a 100% accurate move will be 80%, while a 90% accurate move would be 72%. Accuracy is a huge game changer, as if you miss your move, then you've essentially wasted your turn. But a 50% attack boost is also a huge buff. So all you gamblers out there that think they're one spin away from the big win might want to risk it for the biscuit and see this as an enticing ability. While this ability isn't the most common, it is seen on a good chunk of the Mons who have access, since the power boost is a way for them to become threatening enough to fit in on a team. As a prolific gambler myself, using such moves as Focus Blast and Stone Edge on occasion, I do see the appeal, especially on Mons like Truant, who can patch up their accuracy with Hone Claws, or in combination with moves that can't miss like Aerial Ace on Delibird and Rufflet. We'll put Hustle in the even risk reward tier. Dry Skin is an ability that not only grants an immunity to water type moves, but also heals the user by 25% of their max HP if hit by a water type move. It also heals for 1/8 max HP every turn in the rain. The downside of this ability is Dry Skin also gives a bit of a fire weakness. It's only 25% more damage though, which definitely is less of a downside than taking double damage. In addition to this, Dry Skin deals 1/8 of a user's max HP and damage if the weather is sunny. So while a water immunity and rain healing is really good to have, the negatives can come into play pretty commonly, although not drastically. This will go into the generally worth it tier, as immunities are amazing to have, and the downsides aren't drastic to consider not using it. The next abilities we have are Lightning Rod and Storm Drain. These abilities have the same downside, so I'm going to group them together. These abilities draw in all electric and water type moves directly and make them target the user. And since Generation 5, it also provides an immunity to these attacks while raising the user's special attack one stage. Good abilities in singles and doubles, but doubles are where they have negative effects. All attacks and status moves will be directed to the Pokemon with these abilities, including ally moves. This means if you were to use a single target electric type move against an opposing Mon, and you had an ally with Lightning Rod, the ability would draw that attack in. The common workaround is moves that target everyone on the field, like Surf and Discharge, but if you wanted to use Thunder Wave or Scald, you wouldn't be able to, and it could limit your options. Since the negative effects are strictly around team building, and overall these abilities are really great, we'll place both of these into the top tier. Perish Body is a signature ability of Cursula. It acts similar to the move Perish Song. When the user is hit by a contact move, both the attacker and Perish Body user have a Perish counter of 3 turns start. After 3 turns, if you haven't swapped out, you will faint. This can be good for forcing a switch or securing a victory against your opponent's last Mon, but it also forces you to either switch or sack your Cursula. So most of the time you are put in a similar negative position that your opponent is. One pro is that as a ghost type, Cursula can't be trapped, but I think we'll put this ability in the even risk reward tier. Another rare ability to cover is the Mr. Rhineline's signature Screen Cleaner. This ability ends the effect of Light Screen, Reflect, and Aurora Veil on both sides of the field. It's a pretty situational ability, as you're not always going to see screens, but in theory it could be useful. You just have to put this MF on your squad. The downside of this ability is you wouldn't use it on a team with your own screens because they would get rid of them. Obviously you wouldn't build a team with these two, but nonetheless it is considered an ability with negative effects. I'm going to put this one as a nothing ability because it isn't a great ability, but isn't risky or necessarily negative to have. One of the better abilities with negative effects is Sheer Force. Sheer Force increases the power of moves with additional effects by 30%, but it also removes the added effects from those moves. Obviously the 30% buff is great, and what makes Mons like the Nidos, Feraligatr, and Darmanitan, among others, really hard to switch into. But it is an ability with negatives, which would be losing out on the secondary chance effects. In some scenarios, you might want the chance to lower defense with Feraligatr's Crunch, or chance to burn or flinch with Darmanitan's common moves. Obviously, you could run their other abilities, and the point of Sheer Force is the extra power, but it is worth a mention of a great ability with negatives. I'm going to place this ability in the great tier. Reason being is the boost these Mons get from this ability is almost always better than the secondary effects they provide. Paired with Life Orb, you're able to nab a lot more KOs you wouldn't naturally have, which is the ultimate goal here. This ability is a shoo-in for the top tier. Soundproof is an ability that sees limited use. All sound-based moves have no effect on the user. This gives you an immunity to strong moves like Boom Burst, Clanging Scales, Torch Song, while also giving you immunity to status moves like Sing and Perish Song. The negatives of this ability are you don't receive beneficial effects of sound-based moves. This means you can't gain an attack raise from an ally's Howl, can't wake up from Uproar, and are unaffected by an ally's Heal Bell. Although Heal Bell will now cure status if a Soundproof mod isn't active when the move is used. So very limited downsides for this ability, and it'll go into the generally worth it tier. Curious Medicine is the next ability to cover, and I actually don't think I've ever seen this used in any situations. It is only usable on Galarian Slowking and is doubles exclusive. When Slowking switches into battle, all stat changes of ally Pokemon are reset to 0. So pretty much just an auto haze to your ally. This could be good for clearing Intimidate and speed drops, but also means it would clear positive stat changes too, like your Dragonite with 2 Dragon Dances that is about to win the game for you. Slowking isn't the greatest doubles Pokemon to begin with, as its calling is being a bulky regenerator pivot in singles, so this ability is pretty pointless on it. So I'm actually going to put it in the generally negative category, as I think this leaves the user worse off. Flipping the switch to a great signature ability, we have Kamala's Comatose. With this ability, Kamala is always drowsing and essentially has a sleep status condition while not being prohibited from using moves as normal. This lets it block other status conditions like Poison and Burn due to being treated as sleeping. It can also use the moves Sleep Talk and Snore anytime. The negatives of this ability are that Pokemon using moves like Wake Up Slap and Hex will have their power doubled. Comatose is also vulnerable to damage from Dream Eater, Nightmare, and Bad Dreams. You aren't able to use Rest as well. Most of these scenarios are pretty uncommon or normally don't affect Kamala, so you'll rarely see the negative effects of this ability. I'm going to put this in the great tier with how niche any negatives would interact with it. The Ruin abilities are next, and we're going to rank them all together as their downsides are similar enough. The ability Beat of Room lowers the special defense stat of all Pokemon besides the user by 25%. Sword of Ruin lowers defense, Tablets of Ruin lowers attack, and Vessel of Ruin lowers special attack. These are great abilities as singles with no real downsides, but it does affect ally Pokemon in doubles. This means that your own allies will have their stats lowered if you're using any members of the Treasures of Ruin. It might not matter if it's one of your offensive stats that you aren't using, but either defensive stat being lowered is definitely a downside. And with most of these mons having a fairly prominent role in VGC, you have to build your teams with these abilities in mind. I'm going to put these in the lower part of the top tier. If they were that detrimental, these mons wouldn't be used so much, and in singles they are only positive. Next we have Guerrilla Tactics, the signature ability of Galarian Darmanitan, and it's essentially Choice Band the ability. It boosts Darm's attack stat by 50% and locks it into the first move it uses when sent out. If it was a bad ability, then Darm wouldn't have been banned to Ubers, but the hindrance of being locked into the first move you use, even if you aren't Choice, does limit this Pokemon's flexibility. Almost all Darmanitan with Guerrilla Tactics would run a Choice item anyways, as they would be more useful than any other damage boosting items. So this mon more so leans into the negatives, knowing it's one-dimensional, but still really strong regardless. This does leave you to be easier scouted though, since even if you are using a different item or have been knocked off, your opponent will know you can change up your moves. This one will go into the top of the generally worth it tier, since the only mon who has access would usually use a choice item anyways. The abilities Emergency Exit and Wimp Out function the same, so they will be tiered together. These abilities swap the user out if they take damage that brings them below half of their max HP. This includes attacks, passive damage, hazards, but doesn't include methods like Substitute and Belly Drum. It's exclusive to the Golisopod line and plays a big part of preventing this Pokemon from being competitively viable. I know it was supposed to synergize with First Impression by giving it more attempts to use it, but this mon could have been a really solid bulky sweeper with Bulk Up or Swords Dance combined with Leech Life. Mostly any setup attempts can be foiled by the opponent hitting you below half HP and forcing you to switch. This is the only option for an ability on these mons, and I feel like they belong in the lowest tier as it ruins their viability. Mycelium Might is an ability that might look pretty decent, but overall feels like it holds the Toedscruel line back. Any status moves used by this line will go last unless the opponent is using a negative priority move. This means despite having access to a base 100 speed stat and Spore, if you want to use that move, your opponent will be able to act first. This ability adds the Mold Breaker effect to these status moves in turn. This would let you Spore or Leech Seed a Sap Sippermon, or cause status to Goldengo and Garganacl by ignoring their abilities. You could use powder moves on Overcoat Mons. There are a handful of situations this ability could be helpful, but there are also abilities you still can't affect. Insomnia and Vital Spirit users can be put to sleep this way, but these abilities will activate at the end of the turn to cure their status. Same goes with abilities like Own Tempo, Limber, and Immunity. With Toedscruel's limited status pool, a lot of the abilities you could ignore don't actually get ignored, and moving last in the turn is such a detriment that you might not even want to run status moves, besides Spore obviously. So I'm going to put this in generally negative, as I don't think it ruins this Pokemon, but it definitely hurts it. Unaware is mostly seen as a great ability. It ignores any stat changes of other Pokemon, so a +6 Draco Meteor will do the same amount of damage to a Quagsire, the one at neutral. The downsides is it will ignore negative stat changes as well, so a -6 Draco will also do the same amount of damage. Any defense drops your opponent has will also be ignored, so you can't take advantage of that. Accuracy and evasion drops will be ignored. With a lot of the powerful moves in the game having the drawback of lowering your stats, these scenarios can come up pretty often. Your Unaware Mon will be able to take on setup sweepers better, while also ignoring Mons who buff defenses and evasion, but other Pokemon being able to spam their powerful moves without realizing the stat drop drawback can hurt you as well. Luckily, you can usually just swap the Unaware Mon out if they're lowering their stats and take advantage there, so this ability is generally worth it, I'd say. We have 2 more abilities left because I'm covering these next 3 as one.
Nice.
Mold Breaker and the abilities Turbo Blaze and Terravolt. These abilities have the same effect of ignoring most other abilities. In singles, this ability is great. In doubles, it does have some negative effects though. You will not gain attack if paired with a Flower Gift user. You will ignore your opponent's abilities as well, which can be good or bad. You can Helping Hand your Goldengo, as this commenter pointed out in my video about obscure mechanics, but your Levitators won't be immune to your Earthquakes. You will hit your allies with the ability Telepathy and Wonder Guard as well. There are other scenarios that are negative too, but I think it isn't really too big of a deal, and you would just have to build a little more carefully around a Mold Breaker Mon. Otherwise, this is a great ability and worth any negatives it can bring. And for the last ability, I saved this one just for the loyal viewers that made it this far. It's perhaps the most infamous bad ability, Slow Start.
Okay.
This ability cripples Regigigas by having its 2 most important stats, attack and speed, for 5 turns.
Oh my god!
This resets every time Regigigas swaps out. This ability forces a Mon with these crazy base stats to sit untiered, forcing him to hang out with Slaking, as it's the only other Mon that truly feels its pain. It makes it the worst of the Regis, even though it has the best stats and is seen as their leader. It was considered a huge buff when Regigigas finally gained access to Protect, as any tool to stall these 5 turns is needed. This Mon is not worth the effort of working around its ability, and if these facts don't tell you just how bad negative abilities are actually, then I don't know what will. Slow Start, you will sit in the bottom of the lowest tier where you belong, as you help prove that truly terrible abilities can ruin a Pokemon's competitive viability. Thanks for watching, buds. If you enjoyed this video, you should check out this one next. And don't forget to become a bud and hit that sub and like button. Take it easy, buds.